My name is Hannah, and these are my eyebrows. And this is my no-buy year. I'm ready to dye my eyebrows again, and I promised that I would film it for you next time, so that is what I am about to do. It's the middle of the day and the windows are open, so you might hear the ice cream truck, you might hear a helicopter, you might hear Joe, but that is just going to be the nature of the beast today. I don't think that the dye has completely worn out of my eyebrows since the last time I dyed them. When they are completely bare, they're lighter even than this. I have that kind of translucent hair on my face that really blonde people have, even though I'm not blonde. This is my natural hair color. But the hair on the rest of my body is like bleached blonde. So when my eyebrows aren't dyed, they do have a slight reddish tint, but they're really almost invisible. So I think there's still a little bit of dye lingering in there, but they've become very patchy, and I definitely have to fill them in these days. I like it when every hair is dyed a deep, cool-toned brown and I don't have to fill them in at all. This is what I use. It's the Godefroy Tint Kit. I'll leave a link below. And this is pretty much all that comes in that box. This is a little bag full of portions of powdered dye, and this is the developer, so this is what turns the powder into a paste and makes it into an actual dye that will stain your hairs. Oh, this little angle brush also comes in the kit, and I use it. I will use it. So I use this little black marble dish for mixing my brow dye. The hardest part is getting this little pill apart. You have to pull apart the two halves of the pill and dump the powder into the receptacle of your choice. So I'm going to do that now. I have to use both hands, so I can't hold the dish up and do it on camera, but it's not very interesting, just a little bit of a struggle. So I'm dumping the powder into my little dish. I got some on my thumb, but it's okay because it's just the powder. It won't really stain or dye unless it's been developed. So now I'm going to put some developer into the dish. There is a little measuring cup in the box that shows you how much developer you're supposed to mix in with each pill, but I just eyeball it. That looks good. Now I'm going to mix it together with my little brush. The powder is kind of grainy and it makes the paste kind of grainy at the beginning. So I actually tend to spend a little bit of extra time mixing so that I can make sure that all the little grains are melting into the paste and becoming a part of the dye. It's still a tiny bit grainy, but I think it'll work. It looks like this. And I'm just gonna let it sit for 1 or 2 minutes and make sure that it's fully developed. I don't remember if the way that I'm doing this is according to the instructions on the box. I think I read the instructions when I first got it, but I've done it so many times since then that I just kind of go by instinct now. It works out, so I assume I'm doing it right, but forgive me if you have this product or you use this product and I am demonstrating something slightly different than what the instructions say. I'm not really sure if I'm doing it by the book, but the way that I'm doing it works for me. Let's find out. First of all, it says wear suitable gloves. I'm not doing that. By the way, I am obviously totally barefaced. I just got out of the shower, which is why I'm a bit red. I have on some of my morning skincare up through oil, and I'm doing this with oil on my face. I just have a bit of marula oil over top of a serum. And I like to dye my eyebrows when I've got oil as the top layer of skincare on my face, because then if any of the dye gets onto my skin is less likely to stain because the oil helps to prevent it from sinking into the skin. So I know I'm a little bit shiny, but c'est la vie. And it says right here in the instructions to remove any oils from the area that you're about to treat before you treat it. So that's just to say that I have oil on the rest of my face because it will help if any dye gets onto the rest of my face. But I do want to make sure that there's not oils in my eyebrows or even directly around my eyebrows. Now I'm just going to brush them up a little bit to make sure of the shape. And now I'm going to use this little angle brush to apply the paste to my brows. I'm going to start in the middle of the arch because that's where I want my brows to be the darkest, so that's where I want the dye to sit the longest. So I'm going to do the middle on both sides. Then I will use the side of the angle to carve out the front of my brows, and then I will go in and perfect the tail. I really have to concentrate while I'm doing this, so I won't be able to narrate, but I will use this little tiny mirror so as hopefully not to block your view of what I'm doing. So for the tail, I'm trying to draw the tail out rather than down, and I'm making sure to coat every hair in the tail of my brow with the dye. This brow has a little bit more of a natural arch, so I always try to balance that out when I'm doing this, but for some reason I can never quite get it. It's like as soon as I add the equivalent arch on this side looks too exaggerated. It's almost as if it's more natural looking to have slightly asymmetrical brows, which I think is probably true. So the longer I leave the dye on, the darker the brows will be. And there is a little rubric in the instructions. It's like 4 minutes for black, 3 minutes for brown, or something like that. But I've obviously already taken at least 5 minutes to just get the shape on. So usually as soon as the shape is on and I'm happy with it, I really just let it sit for like 30 seconds or a minute, and then I go ahead and wipe it off, because you can always add more, but you can't take it away. But during this time, I'm actually going to pack a little bit more right onto the arch of my brow where I want it to be the darkest. This is also the moment at which I usually go to my boyfriend and say, "I dyed my brows, what do you think?" Alright, I have a wet washcloth here. I'm going to go ahead and wipe off the dye, and then I'm probably going to have to duck into the bathroom and make sure that I get all of the dye off using some water from the sink. So I'm going to wipe it off and then I'll be right back. I'm trying to be as gentle as possible with my brows while still making sure to get off every scrap of dye, because it will continue to develop and continue to darken if you leave it on. So I'm going to go use a bit of soap and just make sure that it's all washed out. Okay, so I almost never manage to dye my brows without having to go back in with a tiny bit of dye for a second round. And I'm going to do that this time. Here's why. On the front portion of this brow, I feel like I didn't bring the dye far enough down. So this part of the brow is sort of starting higher up. The darkness is starting higher up than on this side. That's the main issue that I have, but as long as I'm going back in for round 2, I would like the line of the top of the brow to be dyed a little bit darker. Because here's the thing, I'm dyeing my hairs primarily, But for the first couple of days after I do this, my skin is also going to be dyed. It's kind of like a permanent brow just for a couple of days. And then that will wash off and the hairs themselves will stay dyed for much, much longer than that. But as long as I'm going to have this 2 or 3 day window of nice tattooed brows, I might as well get the brows that I want. So I'm going to go back in and just do a little bit of shaping and a little bit of extra darkening. Alright, that looks just how I want it, so I'm going to let that sit for a couple more minutes. I think I only need the washcloth to get this off. It was a pretty light layer of dye. Alright, that's that with the dye. It's done. And you can see how, well, I can see how the arch on this brow is stubbornly ever so slightly higher than the arch on this brow, but I think I did a pretty decent job this go round of keeping them symmetrical. I know that right now, without any other makeup on my face, I totally look like Bert from Sesame Street, but I found that even just a touch of mascara will pretty much balance out the strong brow, and with my normal daily routine, little bit of skin, little bit of lip, little bit of eye, I'm good to go. I'm gonna brush them up so that I can really see the shape. I already have pretty thick hair on my whole body. Like, my hair is thick on my head, and it's also thick everywhere else that it grows, meaning that the hairs themselves are actually thicker. That's what it means to have thick hair. I don't know if you know that. It doesn't just mean that you have more hairs per square inch. It means that the hairs themselves are thicker. But what I was saying is that I have pretty thick hair already, but I find that something about dyeing it makes it feel like the hairs are even thicker. It's almost like the hairs absorb the dye and they become more bulky. I love the bushy feeling of my eyebrows after I dye them. So sometimes at this moment I do a little bit of shaping, like I'll go in with tweezers and just pull out any really stray hairs that are disturbing the arch of the brow by growing down below the line. But I don't think I'm going to do that today. There are a couple of stray hairs and it's not totally symmetrical on either side. It's not a perfect groomed arch, but I like that. I've been trying to do a little bit less aggressive shaping of the brow and let them be a little bit more natural. The last thing I will do though is to put a little gel in them so you can see how they look. One thing I never do is to trim my brows with scissors. I really like them to be as long as possible, and sometimes they get quite long, like they're so long that they stick up really far when I brush them up. But I prefer this to having them accidentally have been sheared too short. And I actually like it. And that is it. That is how I dye my brows at home for the defined but natural look. If you have any questions, if there's anything I didn't cover, please leave a note in the comment section down below and I will get back to you. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope that you will remember to take extra good care of yourself and your brows this week so that you and your brows can be the most effective versions of yourselves as you do your work in the world.